Covering social media part 2. What is it doing to us? Last week we talked about how we got here, and we looked at kind of the advent of the social internet and how we got to where we are now, different social media platforms, and what social media offers that it can't fulfill. It offers anonymity, exploration, and community. And we talked about how what God offers us is far infinitely better. So today we're going to take a deep dive into what exactly social media is doing to us as a people, as a culture. And I lean fairly heavily on Chris Martin, who wrote 2 very helpful books, one that we're going to talk about today and one we're going to talk about next week. So he wrote a book called Terms of Service. I think it was on the slides from last week. But very, very helpful book because it talks about, I think the tagline is, social media may be free, but what exactly is it costing us? So here's the first thing that it's doing to us as a people, as a culture. Side effect of rampant social media use, number 1, is we believe attention assigns value. We believe that attention assigns value. Martin says this: one of the most pervasive lies we believe when we engage with the social internet is that the more attention someone or something gets, the more valuable that popular person or content is. What does it mean? The one lie is really best understood as 2 separate but related lies. A trending or viral piece of content is inherently important simply because it's popular. And number 2, when people pay attention to me, they're telling me I'm valuable. And so this is what the social internet is doing. It's assigning value to attention. It's assigning value to attention. And if you're on TikTok, perhaps, or maybe you know someone who's on TikTok right now, it just ended this past week, is something that has just blown up over the past several summers, called Bama Rush. Is anybody familiar with this? It's the most baffling thing I've ever seen. There's a documentary on HBO Max about it. It's just become insane, where these young ladies are rushing for sororities and doing all these things, doing philanthropy, all this kind of stuff. But every day they post TikTok videos about what they're wearing, the jewelry they're wearing, the shoes they're wearing. And some of these young ladies have been planning out their daily outfits for months, perhaps years in advance, because they want the attention of their sorority of their choice, but also they want the attention of the larger internet at large. Because why? They want to feel valuable. They want to feel valuable. Martin also goes on to say this: attention does equal popularity on and offline. Because so many of us wrongly find our value in how popular we are, it follows that if attention equals popularity, and popularity equals importance and value, then attention equals importance and value. A plus B equals C. This is not true, but believing it can lead to some real, deep mental, emotional, and spiritual issues. Because we're placing our value in what content we're generating, what someone says about us, how many likes we're getting, how many comments we're getting, how many posts that we make that people see and view. And if we allow ourselves to think this is what gives me value, and our culture has bought into this hook, line, and sinker, then it's no wonder that we've got an entire generation that is completely anxious about how people view them. Next week, I'm going to talk briefly about a book written by a secular author his name is Jonathan Haidt, called The Anxious Generation. And he's just looking at the data of how social media and screen use and everything has affected this generation of kids that are in their, just beginning teenage years. And I remember when I first started in student ministry, sitting down across the table from a young lady. It was a group of us, but this young lady was asking for her mom's Instagram login to go like a picture that she had posted because it didn't have a certain number of likes yet. Like there was an equation that she had worked out in her head that I posted this picture, and if it doesn't reach this number of likes within 10 minutes, then I'm going to take it down because it's not a good enough picture of me. It's just baffling. But this is what it's doing to us. Martin goes on to say this: as Christians, we're to find our identity in the finished work of Christ and our standing as image bearers of God. Even for non-Christians, personal value or purpose shouldn't be sought in the attention given by others. Such a pursuit leads to all kinds of emotional and spiritual distress. He continues, many of us are addicted to the social internet because we're addicted to attention and affirmation. We seek to be attention rich because we are joy poor. That's a great line. We seek to be attention rich because we are joy poor. If you're a Christian reading this, be reminded that you are God's workmanship, created in Christ to do good works, Ephesians 2:10, and that you have been raised with Christ, Colossians 3:1. Your value is not determined by how much attention you do or do not receive. You are loved by God as his image bearer, Genesis 1:27, and as his child, John 1:12. And so what we have here is we have a culture that says you only matter if people are paying attention to you. You only exist if people are paying attention to you. But what the Christian worldview says is, no, you matter because God made you. And God pays attention to you. And you matter because you are his image bearer, and he has good works for you to do. And he says here, we seek to be attention rich because we're joy poor. We have substituted and we have traded joy, deep abiding joy in knowing God our Father, with fleeting happiness. And we seek this in a million different ways, also on the social internet. So if we can, and here's the real issue. Tim Keller has a great line about this. He was talking to a young lady, and she said, I know that I am a daughter of the King. I know that I have a place in the new heavens and the new earth. But what good is that when boys in high school won't even look at me? And he said the problem was that God was on audio, but boys were visual. And if you have ever been listening to something but watching something else, guess which one gets more of your attention? And so that's the world, that's the water. Remember last week, it was the picture of the older fish and the two younger fish. And the two younger fish were like, what's water? That's the water that we are living in, and that's the water that we've got an entire generation growing up in. They can know these things, and so many of our students do. They know that they are loved by God, that they bear his image, that they have good works prepared beforehand for them, and that's what gives them worth. And they hear that all the time, but they see a world that says, no, you only have value, you only exist if people are paying attention to you and they like your stuff. So you talk about an uphill battle. Side effect 2, we trade privacy for expression. We trade privacy for expression. Martin uses this example of your attention is like an oil rig. And the data, things about you that exists in your brain, in your person, that's the oil. And so social media is tapped into this oil rig of keeping your attention to get your data. The more they have your attention, the more they learn about you. And these algorithms are unbelievably smart. They're unbelievably smart. So the more they can keep your attention, the more they can learn about you. The more they can learn about me. Martin says the goal of the attention economy is not just to learn about human behavior, but to influence, or often more maliciously, to manipulate human behavior. And I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but I mean, we've seen articles about this, about Facebook doing this, Instagram doing this. I mean, even in their own internal documents, Wall Street Journal got a hold of some of Instagram's internal documents, and Instagram acknowledges we know the manipulative and damaging behavior that we are causing to teenage girls. And they roll right along. Now, another thing that he says here is that secrecy and privacy are different. So many of you may be saying, I've got nothing to hide. Like, so what if Facebook knows that I like to shop at this store, or that I like Trader Joe's, or that this is, the team that I follow, whatever. You're confusing secrecy with privacy. Privacy is like secrecy, that's a little bit more nefarious. Like, you might have something that you want to hide. Privacy, and he uses this example, which I thought was great. Even when you go to the bathroom in your home, you still shut the door. Your family knows what you're doing, but you still shut the door. Unless you have little kids, then they just don't care. Right? So secrecy and privacy are different. Like, imagine if you took the position of, I've got nothing to hide, then okay, let's just open up all your windows, open up all your doors, and let's just set up cameras outside your house and just broadcast to the world what it is that goes on in your home. You start to feel a little icky a little bit. Now, I know the Kardashians have made a whole empire out of that, but that's just a whole nother thing, right? Secrecy and privacy are different. And privacy is okay, and guarding and protecting our families is okay. And being aware that these companies are out there trying to get all this information from you and doing everything that we can to secure and protect our families from them. Martin says this, one chief data scientist at a well-respected Silicon Valley education company said this: the goal of everything we do is to change people's actual behavior at scale. We want to figure out the construction of changing a person's behavior, and then we want to change how lots of people are making day-to-day decisions. We can test how actionable our cues are for them and how profitable certain behaviors are for us. And so he goes on, he says, our desire for personal expression is the gasoline that keeps the social internet running. We want people to know who we are and what's going on in our lives. As we share all of this information, we're put into categories. A minivan owner with anxiety whose anniversary is June the 1st, and Facebook delivers us advertising based on this data. This means that theoretically, someone who works for a tire company could run ads targeting minivan owners with anxiety, saying something like, are you afraid your tires are unsafe? Buy your tires from us before you regret it. And so I don't want to do this. I don't want to put all this up here to scare you and say, everybody delete your Facebook all at once. The goal here is not to frighten you. The goal is to just be mindful, to think. There's no neutrality in the world. Like I said last week, social internet can be good. Social media can be good. It's a brick. With bricks, you can build houses, but with bricks, you can also throw it at someone's car and cause damage. So we need to be mindful of this. Martin says, when people are viewed as little more than wells of data to be tapped for marketable information, it is hard to see them as beautiful beings made to reflect their creator. The invasion of privacy we experience through the social internet are demeaning to our personhood. And let's step outside of social media for a second. We do this all the time. We reduce people to its rather than thous, rather than yous. In conversations, if we're not fully present with someone, if we're not fully engaged and aware of our own emotions and our own thoughts and our own feelings, then we can't be fully present and aware of someone else's thoughts, emotions, and feelings. I mean, we do this with our spouses, we do this with our kids, we do this with random people that we talk to on the street. And the social internet just does this and blows it up even more because it reduces someone to what they post, and what you post is very rarely all of who you are. And so if we are going to walk and live in a world that is swimming in social media ridiculousness, Christians ought to be the forerunners in acknowledging that people are made in the image and likeness of God, and not just content creators, and they don't just matter and they don't just exist because of what it is that they post. Like, very often, like, I'll see something on TikTok or Instagram or whatever that Aaron will show me, and most of the time it's a recipe. But the person preparing the recipe, I'm like, I also start to think, like, what's their marriage like? How do they parent their kids? Because they're not just a cook in the kitchen preparing this awesome recipe that I'm going to mess up. They're a person that has a life. Like, what do they struggle with? What do they think about? Like, how is the social internet affecting how they view themselves? Because they're a person. Vane. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, if attention equals value, then we want all the value that we can. We want all the attention that we can. And if I have more than you, then naturally, because of the sinfulness of man, I'm going to feel way better about myself than I feel about you. But if you start to get more than I do, yeah. All right, number 3, side effect number 3, we pursue affirmation instead of truth. In this chapter, he talks about conspiracy theories because social media, if you just track the data, social media has just become a breeding ground of conspiracy theories. Like he talks about this a little bit, but then he also talks about Pizzagate. I think it was back in like 2018, where this 28-year-old man, father of 2, drives 6 hours to Washington, D.C. and shoots up a pizza joint because he read some QAnon conspiracy theory about child trafficking that was happening there. And this was a funny chart that I saw. Most Americans believe JFK conspiracy theories. 61% of Americans in this study believe that someone else was involved other than Lee Harvey Oswald. I didn't say it because we're recording this. Talk to me after and I'll tell you my thoughts. Something less obvious? Yeah. But I just thought that was interesting. Like I just Googled JFK conspiracy theories, and that was the first picture that popped up. And so social media becomes a breeding ground for conspiracy theories. Why? Martin says, the natural proclivity of almost everyone is to use social media to connect with others who think like we do. Where this gets us into trouble, though, is when it creates a sort of tunnel vision effect. I think other sociologists have used echo chamber, in which we are unable to see the world through the eyes of people who think, live, and believe differently than we do. This makes us prone to believe that whatever our like-minded friends and family share on social media, without testing it against reliable, to believe what our like-minded friends and family share on social media without testing it against a reliable source of facts and information. And so this is what happens. Slowly but surely, your social media network just begins to look like a whole bunch of people that think and talk and act just like you do. Now, in some ways, that's good. You have this kind of online community, which you can have some community online, where you can have kind of like-minded thoughts about things, like-minded philosophies about things. But where that gets dangerous is if it doesn't broaden your worldview a little bit to at least open yourself up to the necessity of challenging what it is you truly believe. If you aren't challenged in your beliefs, then you're not being sharpened. You aren't truly having to put the rubber to the road and say, do I really believe this? Is this really true? Yeah, Lee? Right. 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 Mm-hmm. John. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And so what does that mean for us as Christians? Again, going back to the goal here, the goal is for us to be mindful and to question things. All right, is this verifiable? Is this true? Outside of that, does this match up to the Christian worldview? Okay, it doesn't. Now, how does the Christian worldview speak to this issue? Yeah. He goes on to say, I should have made this bigger. I apologize. It says, today, if you come across a story on the internet about politicians trafficking children from sources you've grown to trust because they confirm your prior assumptions, it is more likely to define your reality, a reality no offline fact checker can convince you to change. We have become so addicted to the social internet and the steady diet of content that aligns with our beliefs that we eat up whatever we're fed without checking if it's laced with poison. Worse, we have come to like the taste of the poison, and no one can take away our freedom to consume it. And so, what does this mean for Christians? A couple of things. One, I have become more appreciative of those in my life who think differently about certain things. Key term, certain things, not the main things, but about certain things, because it helps sharpen my view and helps sharpen my arguments and may even lead me to change thinking about some things. Like, I've got one friend who we agree on so many of the basic things about the gospel, about church, about everything, but we disagree on just about every other thing that we talk about how to make this kind of decision or what to do with this, just day-to-day logistical administrative stuff. But I appreciate that so much because it makes me think harder about what it is that I believe is right. And so rather than having a bunch of people around me, having a bunch of people around you that think like you, talk like you, act like you, think the same way that you do, eventually you all just become one big blob of a person, and nobody's really growing, nobody's really thinking deeply and critically, and God gave you a brain to think deeply and critically about things. And so to have people that agree with you on the basics, on the important things, but think differently about minor things here or there, it's good. It's good for you to think that way. Okay? Number 4, we demonize people we dislike. This side effect number 4. We demonize people we dislike. And I don't want to say we like in this room, but on social media, you don't have to go far. Where we demonize people we dislike. Martin says this, in many corners of the social internet, a lie lingers that people who disagree with me cause me harm. Believing this lie leads us to demonize people we dislike. Now, I'm going to step outside of social media for a second, and I would say that I think that many of us, if not most of us, believe this lie. And that's why we keep our circle small. They think like me, they act like me, they talk like me, they go to the same places I do. They're not going to harm me. There's a guy that wrote a great book called Failure of Nerve. His name's Ed Friedman. And it talks about leadership and family systems theory. It's really complicated, but it's really, really fascinating. But in this book, he talks about we insulate ourselves because we don't want people to harm us, but there's a difference between being harmed and being damaged. And I remember talking to the college and career class about this. You need people in your life that will harm you. Not damage you, but harm you and say hard things to you. Say things that will hurt you to lead to your better good. But the social internet, we insulate ourselves because people who disagree with me cause me harm. And we don't like to be harmed. And so believing this lie leads us to demonize people we dislike. So how do we believe that disagreement equals harm? This is from The Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt and Luke Kenioff. I can't remember the guy's first name. Kyle's read this book. Greg? There you go. Kyle's read this book. So in this book, how we got to disagreement equals harm is this. First, a culture of safetyism. And I'll talk about what that means in a minute. Number 2, an overestimation of our fragility. And number 3 is our inability to give others the benefit of the doubt. So what do I mean by safetyism? Jonathan Haidt says this: safetyism refers to a culture or belief system in which safety has become a sacred value. which means that people become unwilling to make trade-offs demanded by other practical and moral concerns. Safety trumps everything else, no matter how unlikely or trivial the potential danger. I remember reading an article back several years ago where it was a Christian school, I think it was in Virginia. Parents were in an uproar because one of the Bible teachers had invited a friend of his who was an atheist to come to his class, and they were going to debate in front of the class. And the parents didn't like that, having an atheist come to their kid's Bible class, because what if he makes a good argument and my kid believes it? Let's just keep him safe. Okay, I kind of see that. But also, if we want an atheist anywhere, don't we want him in a Bible class? And secondly, don't we believe, shouldn't we have faith that what our child is learning in Bible class, at home, at church, makes them strong enough to hear the atheist's arguments and refute them? But no, we got to be safe. Got to keep them safe. Got to keep them insulated. They're not ready for that yet, even though they were seniors. And they're gonna see it in 6 months anyways. But we got to keep them safe. So this is how we got to this thinking that disagreement equals harm. Well, if they disagree with me, then they threaten my safety, and safety is a sacred value, and I'm not willing to trade safety for anything else. Number two, the overestimation of our fragility. Martin says this: overprotection for fear of being fragile actually makes us more fragile, because we lack exposure to small daily adversities that make us stronger and more prepared to endure more life-changing adversity that may come later in life. And so when we become more insulated, we're not getting dinged every day. We're not getting hit. We're not taking these little hits to our egos. We're not taking these little hits to our social interactions. And so we become more and more fragile, so that when someone does hurt our feelings, then we just collapse like a house of cards, rather than learning and building up a tolerance to it and understanding that this may harm me, but it's not going to damage me. This may not feel good, but I'll live. So I was thinking about this throwing the football with Cole the other day in the front yard, and I told him it may hurt a little bit if it hits you in the face, but eventually it'll stop. Eventually it'll stop. And I didn't try to hit him in the face. It just happened. That's his fault. He didn't catch it. It's not the quarterback's responsibility to catch the ball, too. And then number three. Hey, who has? Yes, Marcia. It is. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's difficult, and this is going to be the easy answer. I think it depends on the kid. And this is kind of getting into maybe the parenting class that's coming up in the fall. And this is not at all what I think everyone should do. This is a conversation Aaron and I have had. We want to, quote unquote, beat the world to our kids. If the world is after their innocence, we want to be the ones that, for lack of a better term, take it from them before the world does. Because I've seen in my life the damage that does. That it would have been much more helpful and much more instructive if my parents had had a conversation with me about things before I learned about it from the world. That's another issue, but that's a very good question. And yeah, it's hard. It's hard to do that. And then number three, our inability to give others the benefit of the doubt. Martin says, what is important for us as we try to understand the waters of the social internet in which we swim, is to recognize that others will likely willfully misinterpret what we say and assume the worst about us, while we do all we can not to reciprocate. Anybody ever been in an argument with somebody on social media? Isn't it just the most futile exercise in the world? For those of us who consider ourselves followers of Christ, the great peacemaker, we ought to be the first to work to resolve any social media conflict because we assume the best of others, or at the very least, we assume the brokenness of others. We cannot assume Christian morality on those who are not Christians. We should expect non-believers to act like non-believers. So when you're arguing with a non-believer on Facebook and they say something a non-believer would say, don't be surprised. I can't believe they would say that. Well, you should. We can't expect non-believers to act like Christians. We can't do that. We should hope and pray and act like Christians to non-believers. But if we get down in the mud with them, then it's lost. And I would much rather Christians, rather than continue to engage in unhelpful social media debates, just say, hey, let's meet. Because if we can keep if we can keep something in between, if the world can keep something in between them and Christ, they're going to do it. So it's on Christians to get past that media, get past that barrier, that thing in the middle, and say, hey, we can continue having this debate, but let's do it in person. Because what I've found and what I've seen is they may rail against Christianity on the internet, but if they get across you from the dinner table, they get real quiet all of a sudden. Because they get to see you. You become a person. You're not just someone on the other side of a screen typing an answer to them. You become a person to them, and they become a person to you. They're no longer just a nameless, shapeless void that you're just lobbing arguments into. They're a person who's made in the image and likeness of God, who's been broken by sin and needs the love of Christ, who thinks wrongly about some things. So if we can't assume the best and give this person the benefit of the doubt, give them the benefit of the brokenness. Understand they're broken by sin and that Christ can repair them and fix them. Last thing, side effect number 5. We destroy people we demonize. Our culture destroys people that we demonize. This is where we get cancel culture. So there's 4 primary factors of cancel culture, okay? Number 1 is subjective morality. I can cancel anyone who I think disagrees with my morality. And this has its roots back in the Enlightenment and a whole bunch of things, and Rock is talking about it with Strange New World. This my truth, your truth, his truth, her truth. Truth is subjective, therefore morality is subjective. Okay, well, if truth is subjective, step in front of a bus. That's absolute truth coming down Germantown Road at you, and whose truth is going to win out? Bus's truth. That's absolute truth. There's absolute morality there, but cancel culture is subjective morality. This is what I think to be morally true. These are my moral absolutes, and if you don't agree with them, then you're canceled. Number 2, there's no incentive for reconciliation on the part of the person who has been canceled. There's no roads back in. Once you're canceled, you are done. You cease to exist. You are no longer a person. You're no longer a thing. We don't talk about you. You just go away. Number 3 is unclear objectives and demands. You're canceled, but what can I do to not be canceled? How can I get my way back in? And number 4 is no realistic means of follow-up. There's no realistic means of, all right, did you learn your lesson? We canceled you, did you learn your lesson? It's just loud yelling, screaming, you don't exist anymore, you don't agree with the error of the day, you don't agree with the morality of the day, therefore you cease to exist, we're all moving ahead without you, and you're done. And, yeah, Steve. I'm going to give you 2. And to show you the absurdity. Harvey Weinstein and Chick-fil-A. I made the Chick-fil-A picture. Harvey Weinstein, sexual abuse, years of sexual abuse, powerful people covering it up, comes to light, he gets canceled. CEO of Chick-fil-A comes out and says basically that they support a biblical worldview of marriage. And now if you eat at Chick-fil-A, you're anti-gay. It didn't work. Yeah. Steve.
The hallmark of cancel culture is that if you apologize, which is a follow-up that we would automatically think of,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't bother you anything. It gives them an excuse to cancel you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No way out.
Yeah. So there is a way out. There's no biblical way out. So another example I could have put up here back several years ago, Chris Pratt, who goes to a church, I guess it's a church, goes to a church out in California, I think it's called the Zoe Church or whatever, but was photographed walking into this church, and so some people got on the church's website and did some research about the church's beliefs and things like that, and it's a biblical church, and they say, we believe the marriage is between a man and a woman, and so they start attacking Chris Pratt and hammering him and calling him anti-gay and homophobic and all this kind of stuff because he was walking into a church. And he comes out and he capitulates to the secularism of the day and says, the views of my church are not necessarily my views, and he bows because he doesn't want to get canceled because he wants to continue working. The biblical answer, and when I say there's no biblical way out, you're going to separate yourself from the culture if you're going to stand on a biblical worldview. To continue to say, yeah, I do believe what Chick-fil-A said and what the Bible says about marriage being between one man and one woman, then you're canceled in today's culture. And so when I talk about cancel culture and what the side effect is, we destroy people, we demonize. I mean, Harvey Weinstein was celebrated for years until it came out that he had done some really, really, really bad stuff. Then it's like, okay, well, we have to cancel him now. But then Chick-fil-A comes out for biblical morality and biblical marriage, and it doesn't fly with the culture of the day, then we have to cancel him. And these two things are drastically different, but the result's the same in the culture. Van. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dennis Quaid. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Sorry, I'm looking something up here because it's a great quote that I wish I'd put up here. Yes. So where we are now, the moral revolution, this is where we are. What was celebrated is condemned. For centuries, biblical marriage, biblical worldview, man and woman was celebrated, but now it's condemned. What was condemned is now celebrated. LGBTQ agenda is now celebrated, and those who won't celebrate it are condemned. What was celebrated is now condemned. What was condemned is now celebrated, and if you won't celebrate what was once condemned and is now being celebrated, then you're condemned. And this is the world that we live in. So what do we do? What do we do if this is the world that we live in, if this is the water that we're swimming in? What do we do? A few things. Number one, study history. Those who don't learn from history are what? Doomed to repeat it. Study history. And also, Martin makes the argument that it puts you in your place. Like, not just study American history, but if you study church history, there's nothing new under the sun. Just now Christians are hated faster and more vehemently on a digital platform, whereas in the Roman Empire, they didn't have that, but they were still hated. Okay, so study history. It puts you in your place in history and lets you understand, and let that encourage you. There was the most powerful empire that the world has ever known was dead set against destroying Christianity. wanted to eradicate Christians. And now you can pay about 30 euros to walk through the Colosseum as a Christian. And we're here in Germantown as Christians. So let that encourage you and help you understand your place in history. Next, admire creation. Like next week when we talk about just what it's doing to this generation and what it's doing to all of us, it just makes us anxious. If you get outside and just put the phone away for a little bit, and just admire the beauty of the creation that God has given us, it makes all this other stuff fade away, and it reminds you of who you are and that you are a created being, that your worth is in being the crown jewel of God's creation. That out of everything that God made, we're the only thing that he put his hands to. And when he brought man and woman together, he said it's very good. So admire that creation. Next is value silence. Just put it away for a second. Shut it off. Get rid of it. Turn your ringer off. No. But valuing silence, valuing just sitting there. That's one of the reasons why so many of us are addicted to our phones, is because we don't like silence. And you know how I know that? You know how I know that many of us don't like silence? I don't know if it's in the worship guide, but catch yourself next time where the confession of sin in our liturgy, when we have the silent personalized confession, if it's ever at the bottom of this page, I know that if the assurance of pardon is on the next page, when we get to the silence and personalized confession, I'm going to hear pages turning because we're ready to get to the next part. I don't want to sit in silence. Hurry up and get to the assurance of pardon. It's telling. Because when we're sitting in silence, nasty stuff starts to come up. And that's good. When we're sitting in silence, we're reminded that the world is spinning without us and that one day it will continue to spinning once we're dead. And valuing that. Because what social media does is it tries to get us to believe the fact that you are how much attention people pay to you. So we want lots of attention paid to us, and it makes us feel big and important. And then one day we're going to die, and no one's going to pay attention to us. So rather than continue to live the next 30, 40, 50 years believing that lie, let's just go ahead and understand the truth now and let that filter into how we live our lives and value sitting in silence. And understanding that our value is in who God says we are and not what the world says we are. Which leads to the next one, pursue humility. Say, I don't know. I'm awful at that. I'm awful at saying I don't know. Like just before Sunday school, Aaron asked me, how did World War I start? And I wanted to come up with an answer so bad, but I couldn't tell you. I have some ideas, but I don't remember. So I had to, it was hard. It was so hard to just say, I don't know. But pursue, and the social media is against this totally because nobody's humble on social media. And when they are being humble on social media, they're doing it in a way that draws attention to themselves. It's called a humble brag, which is just the most oxymoronic term I've ever heard. But pursuing true humility, it's not thinking less about yourself, it's thinking about yourself less. And thinking about others more. Next is establish accountability, having true community, having people that can look you in the eye and harm you with what they say. Not damage you, but harm you and say hard things because they love you enough to harm you. Having that kind of accountability and building friendships. Building friendships takes time. It takes time, it takes blood, it takes sweat, and it takes tears. And that doesn't happen on social media. You can have some friends, but having true, deep friendships are people that you have bled with, that you have cried with, that you have struggled with, that they know you, that you can call at any time of the day and say, hey, I need you to pray for me. I'll tell you about what later. And they'll say, gotcha. Building those kinds of friendships. And if we can do this, if the church can do this well, living out all these things and being this kind of people, we'll stand out and we'll get hated for it. But it'll also kind of look kind of attractive because this is how God created human beings to operate, is to exist in community and to pursue humility and understand their place in the created order and understand their place in the universe, and to understand that the attention that is paid to us primarily that we should care about is the attention that God gives us. And that is where we derive our worth, not in how many likes we get. Before I pray, any questions, comments, concerns, general anxieties? Bill? Mm-hmm. 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 Wow. Y'all were that bad? State prison at 6th grade? Yo, this is your future. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow. Steve. No. My high school did, but, nobody remembers anything from high school. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes, so next week we're going to talk about, all right, how do we shepherd ourselves and the next generation? And that's his next book is The Wolf in Their Pockets, 13 Ways the Social Internet is Trying to Manipulate Those That You Lead and What to Do About it. And one of his big arguments is delay, 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 delay. Like the longer you can delay opening them up to social media, opening them up to cell phones, the better off they'll be, because again, it offers anonymity, exploration, and quote unquote community. And what sociologists are telling us is that this generation is just not chemically and neurologically wired to handle that yet, and at least to all sorts of damage. John. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, true. So yeah, there is this, but then it also goes deeper. Like one of his chapters is talking about understanding sex, because the world is saying this is what it is, and it's this whole big, large, all-encompassing thing. And if you're not having it and you're not doing it this way, then it just doesn't matter. And the Bible has a very different message about it. And so, how to refute that? So yeah, that's what we're going to talk about next week. Is all right. What do we do about it? How do we get here? What's it doing to us? What do we do about it? One of the books that I talked about last week, Adam Alter, Irresistible, and he talks about just the addictive technology in your phone. He has a quote where he says, "A phone, by its very nature, is a distraction because it's a physical marker telling you there's another world that exists outside of where you currently are, and we can make it look much more interesting than where you are." Like, I applaud all of y'all for not looking at your phones while I'm talking, because what's on your phone is far more interesting than I am, right? And like with students, I remember having to get buckets and tell them to put their phones in the buckets while I'm talking, because I am not nearly as entertaining as Instagram. And they did great. Noel did a great job, okay? But understanding that about where we are, and then, all right, how can we shepherd the next generation in understanding this? I'm already having to have these conversations with my 9-year-old. He's asking when can he have a phone. I'm like, when you're like 17? Maybe. And it's going to be a dumb one. You're gonna be able to call me, mom, and an ambulance. That's it. Morgan. Mm-hmm. And we are called to be formed by where we're all about to go. Yep. We're called Yeah. 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 John.
So if anybody sees me using my phone in worship or Sunday school, I'm taking notes.
Sure. That's what every teenager says. I'm using my Bible app. Yeah. I believe you. Hey, did anybody do the challenge, left your screen time on, got the notification? Like, this is how much screen time you averaged? Anybody want to share? What was your daily screen time from the past week? What? Liar. Your wife is calling you out. Man. You just look, yeah, 21 minutes? Man, all right, why am I teaching this class? Y'all need to teach it. That was 3 hours and 30 minutes. Look, I found Andy Griffith on Paramount Plus, okay? Y'all can get off my back. All right, well, hey, let me pray. If you have any other questions or comments, you can come talk to me after. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this morning. Thank you for these men and women. And Father, thank you for the truth that your word reveals about us. And Father, we live in a world that is completely counter to that message, that our value and our worth is in how much attention other people are paying to us. But Father, eventually that attention is going to go away. And right now it's fleeting. If we don't match up with the morality of the day, then we'll be canceled. And God, the Christian worldview is completely counter to the secular worldview. And so rather than putting all of our hope and our attention on being seen as valuable by the world, which feels nice for a second, let us put our attention and our hopes and our affections and our energies into you giving us value and who we are. That you have made us in your image, that we are your sons and daughters. You have called us, you're calling us here in a minute to go and worship you, to be around your throne and to hear from your word. So Father, help us with that. Help us understand that and help us to desire it more and more and more. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. Thank you all very much.